Hi, Tim Caffrey, founder of Northern Colorado Progressives and your host for today's show. This is a third in a series of shows examining the question, is organized labor relevant in 21st century America? Today's topic, defense spending. I've invited a local labor leader onto the show to explain budget deficits and a shared sacrifice. That's next on the Tim Caffrey Show. Joining me now is Kevin Caffrey, president of the Northern Colorado Labor Council. Thank you, Kevin, for coming on the show today. Welcome.
Sure, Tim.
Today, I want to talk about defense spending and the military-industrial complex. I think it's very important because they say we're out of a recession, but with the amount of people that are unemployed, I don't think they think so. And it's talk about how we all need to be austere, we all need to sacrifice, and yet you've got the military. Defense is the third largest area of the federal budget, consuming 23% of the total and 55% of the discretionary portion, according to CNN. And so I wanted to bring you on, Kevin, and talk about this as a labor leader and get your thoughts on that.
Well, thanks, Tim. I'd like to just point out a few factoids, if I could. I mean, we're looking at a situation where it's just so out of balance. You look at Colorado, we're $1 billion, going to be $1 billion short in our state budget here for 2011. California's got a $25 billion shortfall. The conservative state of Texas, their governor just got back in. They're looking at a $27 billion budget deficit. So, you're looking at so-called liberal states like California with $25 billion, conservative states like Texas with $27 billion. Governor Perry there shored up a lot of his budget, 25% of it, with stimulus money. Now, he berated the president and the Congress for giving him that, but he never slowed down on using it to make himself look good and get reelected as governor of Texas. So we've got to ask ourselves, can we keep going down this path? We saw other nations that went and fought and never accomplished anything in Afghanistan. We're dropping $2 billion a week there. 52 weeks. You don't have to be any kind of a mathematic genius to see that if we would just stop that insane war that we're doing, and as a matter of fact, it's the longest war in the history of the United States over in Afghanistan, stop that, bring our troops home, bring our money home. We've got a situation there where the vice president of the country was stopped in Arab country, and the border protection there found that he was carrying $52 million with him. And they allowed
American dollars.
They allowed him to keep it. Now, you have to scratch your head and ask yourself, where would this guy accumulate this kind of money? In the third poorest country in the world. I mean, they have a GDP there of $14 billion, and we're dropping $120 billion a year there. We have to ask ourselves, for what? What have we accomplished there? I mean, it's just insane. I mean, it seems like that, we could have got every man, woman, and child there, several $1 million and said, go and live the life of the rich and famous and just, don't have war anymore, or we'll pull the money from you. And we could have ended that crazy affair that we're doing there. So I have to ask myself, what we could do with that money in this country. The easy answer to that is balance all the state budgets across the country. So,
well, I think that's interesting because according to one article that I read from the government, it states that, in quote, if the fiscal 2011 war request is approved, total war-related funding, now this is from 2001 to 2011, would reach almost $1.3 trillion. It's just amazing that this has gone way past what to keep America safe, and yet conservatives and the Republicans keep telling us that it's Now it's the public sector unions that are breaking these states with their pensions and everything. And there's absolutely no talk about military spending out there. Nobody on either side of the aisle, be it Republican or Democrat, nobody says that we've got to go in there and we've got to stop this. Even I would believe that even the Tea Party should be outraged at the wasteful spending that we see out there.
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, we've got bases all across the world. I think in excess of almost 600 bases around the world. We've got bases over in Germany still, in England, all over Western Europe. We have, I think there's over 100 and some bases in Japan alone. And how long has World War II been over? 60 years? Mm-hmm. And you have to ask yourself, what's going on here? Is this just a drain? Because it looks like it to me. Let's go back to unions. Let's go back to business. There's the old saying, return on investment. Mm-hmm. Okay, we've invested, like you said, what was it, 1.3 trillion from 2001 to 2011 in Afghanistan, 1.3 trillion, mm-hmm. and got what in return? We need more of this war to continue. We need more mercenaries in that country, just like Donald Rumsfeld said when he wanted to get out of Afghanistan and escalated into Iraq. He said, we've bombed all the dirt that there is in Afghanistan. So we have to ask ourselves, what are we there for? Vice presidents of that country walking around with $52 million on their traveling purse, and this country doing without. In Fort Collins here, we're closing schools. I know there was a battle over closing one of the neighborhood schools in this country. And I want to ask my fellow Fort Collins neighbors here, have you had enough of this waste? Mm-hmm. Because I noticed that, these people fought courageously to keep that school open, and they're going to begrudgingly keep it open. Where do we draw the line? Where do we say, okay, we've done as much as we can there. We need to say we've won, lost, or drawn there in that country, and come home and put that money back here. I see so many conservatives saying, we can't do this stimulus spending in this country. We can't spend this kind of government money, and yet they never point in the direction of military. And let's go back to what Eisenhower said as he was leaving the White House. Beware of the industrial military complex. Yeah, we need to heed his warning. I mean, it was something that he said over 60-some years ago, but I think we need to hearken back to that time when he said it. He was a wise person. He was a general, president of the United States, got us through World War II, and he could see the drain, the money drain. Now we're seeing the effects of it.
Well, it's interesting also in that CNN.com article, How to Cut $1 Trillion from the Pentagon. It was interesting when they gave examples of waste where they said it'll cost $13 billion for the Navy to build a new aircraft carrier, just so some president can have their name on that. I think that's incredible. It also said, and I quote, we spend $50 billion a year maintaining 1,968 strategic nuclear weapons, when an analyst at the Air War College says that 311 are more than adequate for deterrence. So I just think you talk about overkill, but yet again, like you were saying, nobody brings this up. There's no outrage by anyone about, are they really, truly, do they want to bring down the deficit?
Well, when you have Washington, our past president, George W. Bush, and our current president, President Obama, to his credit, his holdover Secretary of Defense, Bill Gates, that came from Bush's administration, when he killed one of the fighter projects that even the Pentagon didn't want. Mm-hmm. They didn't even want this. I mean, we're spending money that the Army, Navy, and Air Force, in a lot of cases, don't even want this. Mm-hmm. These defense things. But that fighter that I mentioned, parts were built. I mean, they're very ingenious in the way they do these things. It was the parts for this plane was built in 48 different states. Right. So they know how to keep the fires alive to keep this, I would say, just a waste of money going.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's interesting because another article that I read on truthout.org was about, according to the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, right now, major weapons programs are overrunning by $300 billion. And again, where is the outrage by the American people, by our elected officials, that we ask to go there to represent us and represent we the people, not big corporations and not special interest groups. So I just think that's a profound statement.
Well, it is, and when you look at 300 billion number, I look at that amount of money, I can't contemplate how big it is, but then I apply it to all the pain that we're seeing in this country, where we're closing down schools. CSU, a great university that we have here in Fort Collins, is laying off professors, and they're cutting back on their staff, and they don't have money for this program and that program. They've raised their tuition 20-some%. CU's raised it almost 10%. And I look at that $300 billion and ask myself, how much could we use it in this country to build roads that we need I was just reading an article that was pretty scary the other day in the Denver Post about how our infrastructure, especially our dams, that these reservoirs that hold back our water, that it's precious commodity that we need out here in the West and in Colorado, and they're dangerously in peril, and they're telling these reservoir operators that you can only fill the reservoir part way, even though we have a overabundance of snowfall this year, so that we could hold back that water, we could have what we need for the rest of the year. And they're telling these agencies that run these reservoirs that you're not going to be able to fill them to the brim because the dams are so insufficient to hold back. I mean, they're eroded to the point where they just don't trust them. They probably should be fixed, but instead of that way, they're just saying, well, let's just study what little we can put in them. So that's what it's costing us. I mean, you look around at the pain in this country, $300 billion just in that one area that we could put back into this country.
Oh, absolutely. Now, real quickly, we've got about a minute left, but I know you've talked about this in the past about the media. And according also to this truthout.org, back in the 1980s, and I know I remember this, and I'm sure you do too, where this gentleman, and I quote, it said, "I helped expose overpriced spare parts in the DoD. Many people still remember the $436 hammer, the $600 toilet seat, and the $7,622 coffee brewer." And there was complete outrage, and there was change. There was a time, but you don't see this being talked about much in the media, and I know that interests you a lot about the media.
Well, it does, and I think it's first of all, it's a failure of the media not to expose these overruns and this absolute waste that's going on in this country, and none of us are any safer because of it. I would argue that wasting money like this, is making us less safe, and I would say that maybe we could wrap our arms around a $600 toilet seat, the outrage of that, more than we can these big numbers of $300 billion. So maybe it's just the numbers, and I know that there's definitely been a deficit of reporting by the media. They're just not doing their job, and so I hope that the little bit that we can reach people here will do more of it to create this outrage that we need.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to have you on here to talk about
Thank
that.
you.
We need to take a short break here. We need to take a short break. We'll be right back. Please stay with us. We're now back. Thank you for joining us. I'm speaking with Kevin Caffrey, president of the Northern Colorado Labor Council. Kevin, in the first segment of this show, we talked about the defense spending and how outrageous it is. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit, shift gears a little bit about Everyone from President Obama on down has said that we all need to make sacrifices for this country. In fact, he was over there just the other day talking to the Chamber of Commerce and sounded a little bit like President Kennedy about not what this country can do for you, but what you can do for this country. In other words, sacrifice. So my question to you is everyone in this country feeling the same sacrifice as the working people?
Well, you have to look at American corporations, and there's some statistics on it that they're doing quite well, even though that the average American worker isn't. And you've got they've rebounded quite nicely from the recession. There was a report just recently that showed corporate profits had jumped up 28% in the third quarter of last year from a year earlier to an annualized total of 1.66 trillion. I said with a T, that's
Wow.
trillion. That's a record high, and it reflects a deep cost cutting in the past and increased in demand for goods and services. And despite these record unemployment, and there's no hope for a reduction clearly in sight, corporations have experienced all-time record highs. Matter of fact, it's the highest since the Commerce Department start tracking these figures over 60 years ago. And basically what American corporations are learning are that they can do a lot more with hardly any workers. And they can also outsource and make tons of money in India and China and not pay anybody anything. And yet they want us as consumers. And let's remember that consumers are over two-thirds of the economy. Mm-hmm. So they want good shoppers, but they don't want you to have a livable wage. And that's what ties in with labor and with unions and job protection and having contracts to work with. Because CEOs, as we discussed earlier, they won't step on the premises without a contract. They want their contract. Sure. And they also want, the financial stability of if they are let go, like Nardelli was with Home Depot, that they can walk away with a golden parachute. Now, a lot of people would think, they give him a gold watch or, maybe $100,000. He walked away with over $210 million. And he hadn't spent his whole life there. Most of his career was spent at General Electric. Now, he drove this country off the cliff, this company, I should say, Home Depot, and yet they rewarded him with $210 million. I mean, we're just seeing all these excesses in Wall Street, excesses in the American corporations. And I say, where's the economic patriotism of these countries? Or these companies, I keep saying countries. Companies, where are they helping us out? Where are they at? They're flying flags over all their buildings, mm-hmm. and they want to be patriotic. I say, bring the jobs back, pass the trade agreements that protect our jobs and our manufacturing, and really be patriotic.
Well, it's interesting that you're saying that, because there was an article that was titled "The New American Oligarchy" out of truthout.org, and it states on there that consider the facts, the statistics, and I quote, 50 years ago, the wealthiest 1% of Americans accounted for $1 in every $10 of the nation's income. Today, it's nearly 1 in every 4. To me, it sounds like there's almost a ruling class that is starting to percolate up to in this country. How do you feel about that?
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, we saw this in the Gilded Age where the robber barons, couldn't build a big enough mansion, and they couldn't have enough private trains to run their families around with. Those were the corporate jets of the bygone era, and the excesses that they lived. Emily Post in her homes that she had around the world and in this country. I mean, they were lavish, mm-hmm. For that time period when we had 20-30% of our seniors living in poverty. And yet these people didn't care. So we have to, understand that this country has a history of redistributing the wealth all the way to the top. And you hear this myth about, it's the rich people that create all the jobs. I say that's the other way around. When you distribute the money to the working class, They're the people that send their kids to college, that buy the cars, that take the vacations, that buy the homes that the builders want to build, that go to the nurseries, that buy the trees and the shrubs and the Home Depots to fix up their homes. Without those people with livable wages, and that's what we want to bestow upon them with labor unions, so that everybody has a chance in this country. You know, not just the CEOs that wield all this power and lobbying ability in Washington, but we, the working people, and I'm talking about teachers and electricians and plumbers and all these people, you know, the people that actually do the work and fight the wars and create the wealth in this country, that they can live a middle-class lifestyle. And you know what turns around? They deposit their money, the banks can lend it out. That's what you're seeing, liquidity problems now, because people don't make enough to save, so that banks don't have the reserve to lend out. So it's a great big cycle here, and if we have a stronger middle class, guess what? The wealthy just get wealthier. Mm-hmm. So really, they're killing the goose that laid the golden egg.
Well, I know, and that's an interesting point that you bring up, because let's just talk locally here in Fort Collins. That, again, we talked about this in a previous show about the pension envy, or that a union person makes too much money. But where are the small businesses in this community going to sell things like automobiles or pickup trucks or things like that to a bunch of people that all they do is work at big box mega store outlets? You know, I'd like to have you talk about that a little bit.
Well,
please.
Look at the direction that we're going in car dealerships. You can see it in this town where you're going with these bigger dealerships. You know, we still have you know, some family-owned dealerships, but for how long? Mm-hmm. Because when you have a company that comes in and they're located in California or New York, and they own 100 car dealerships or 150, the buying power that they have with GM versus one of our local car dealerships, you know, people that you know, they make enough money that they can employ a lot of people locally, pay them decent wages, and then they can also turn that around and give to CSU and our education system here. And you know, we're blessed. We have, you know, these car dealers that in this town, they're locally owned. They've established roots here. But for how long? Like I said, when you see these big box stores coming in paying a minimum wage or not a living wage, you know, their employees of these big box stores go to these car dealerships. Well, they're not going to buy a $50,000 SUV or a $30,000 minivan or that type of thing, or a luxury automobile. They're going to go and buy something used, and these people are going to go away, and the only people that are going to survive are going to be these like big box car dealers, you know, that own multiple dealerships, and you know, they can give out the loans and self-finance, you know, the people that come in, and the people that we know, the local merchants, are going to go away. So this isn't good for anyone. You know, that's why, you know, in order to sustain what we want here, to have a great community, a choice city, you know, we have to have livable wages.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people understand that we're all tied in together with this. It's a domino effect.
Oh, it is.
You know, if I don't have enough money if I'm just making, let's say, just a little bit above minimum wage, that all I'm doing is I just have enough to buy the essentials. I'm certainly not going to go down the street there and go to some specialty store to, you know, to get something, or again, like you say, to the family-owned car dealerships. Or certainly I'm not going to be able to qualify for a house. So what does that do to the local realtors in this town?
Oh, absolutely. They'll be devastated. You're seeing it already with $200 to sell your home, you know, ads out there. You can list it in an MLS service and sell your home for $200. Now you have to do a little bit more of the work yourself, sure. But how many people would spend $200 to sell their home, and let's say they, you know, the average commission 7% on a $200,000 home, And what would you rather pay, $14,000 to that realtor or $200 to the MLS listing? Now, if that home that you're selling for $200 you bought it for $300, but you need to sell it now, it's not worth that. And that's where we're all going, because people aren't making the money. We're not seeing the appreciation. And look at the pension envy. A lot of people think, oh yeah, that state worker or that federal worker, he's retired after 30 years of service to our country and our community, and he's got a livable pension. Now that's just unheard of. It's terrible. Well, I have to ask those people that have that envy of that person, do you want that person to live destitute, or would you rather have that retired county, city, federal worker, state worker have a livable pension and be able to go buy the cars and be able to go downsize and buy a patio home and pay for that, and to have the money and the wherewithal to pay for trips, to go to resorts, to play golf. I mean, to actually be even though they're not working anymore, they would have the wherewithal to go out to eat and to keep our local businesses going. I mean, without that, do we want all our seniors to be Walmart greeters and mowing lawns and going and living with their sons and daughters? I don't think that's a direction our country wants to go.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about that, because I think in this country we've gotten this attitude, and I use this quote that it was on CBS News back in October of 2000 when President Bush, George W. Bush, was running at that time against Al Gore, and he was speaking at a 800 a plate crowd dinner. And as he was talking to these people, and I quote, he stated, "This is an impressive crowd, the haves and the have-mores. Some people call you the elites, I call you my base." I think that's a very profound statement.
I think it pretty much sums it up, Tim, and you've got to ask yourself, how many of your neighbors that that you live next to that mow their own yard and scoop their own walks and walk their kids to school or down to the bus stop could afford to, if they were a supporter of George W. Bush, go there and spend $800 a plate to get him reelected. I mean, it's really symptomatic of this country to think that his people were the haves and the have-mores. Yeah. I mean, where's the populism? This country's comprised of a lot more than just billionaires, and we have to I go back to the economic patriotism. These wealthy people need to understand that they made a lot of their money in this country, and they need to be patriotic and give back and to employ people.
Well, we've got about a minute left. I have really appreciated you coming on and doing this series of shows about organized labor and getting the facts out. What's anything right at the end that you would like to say shortly to the citizens of Fort Collins about organized labor and unions?
Well, I'd like to say this to a lot of the people that work in the high-tech industry, that if they could have been organized 30 years ago, at our high-tech companies. A lot of them have left or consolidated, turned into some other name that we don't know, and ask them that if they were organized back then and they spoke with one loud voice, and they could have protected their jobs from going over to another country. And now they'd just be retiring instead of being laid off, which is basically terminated. They would be retiring, instead of being let go at the height of their careers and then scratching their head going, what's next for me? I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm a software engineer or that type of thing, and that's my expertise, but I'm looking to teach school now, and I'm competing with 200 other software engineers. I think that if they would have organized, they might have been a stronger voice. They could have helped the labor movement. They could have helped stop trade agreements that did get their jobs outsourced.
Well, that's interesting. Well, thank you, Kevin, for coming on and talking with us about, and I think dispelling a lot of the myths out there about organized labor. And I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate this time to do that.
Thank you. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us. If you have questions or comments about today's show, please go to nocoprogressives.com. You can also find us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. Until next time, and remember, stay progressive.